Welcome back to the GCN Racing News Show. It may be mid-October, but we've just had one of the busiest weeks of racing that I can remember. Coming up this week, the final monument of the season, a brand new world hour record, a fourth world title for Pauline Ferrand-Prevot, first World Tour win for monumental, a first outing of the Rainbow Bands for Evenepoel, and the end of an era in pro cycling. This week in the world of racing, we learned that Alejandro Valverde and Vincenzo Nibali have ridden their last professional bike races. Both were competing at Lombardia on Saturday, and it was the Spaniard who fared better, finishing in 6th. It means that he finished the last 25 monuments that he finished inside the top 20. We also learned that Fem van Empel is the woman to beat in cyclocross this season. In what was an enthralling final lap of the first round of the UCI World Cup, she got the better of Alvarado in the closing meters of the race. More on that one later on. And finally, we learned that Tadej Pogačar will finish this season with more wins than any other rider. 16. That's more wins than EF Education, Easy Post and Astana combined. He's also had more wins at World Tour level than EF, Astana, DSM and AG2R combined. And some people are saying he's washed up. UAE team Emirates rode the perfect race at Lombardia on Saturday, putting their entire team on the front once Jumbo-Visma and Ineos Grenadiers fell away. Pogačar attacked on the penultimate climb of the day, and only Enric Mas was able to go with him. Mikel Landa briefly made it back on, but was dropped again on the final ascent of the day, and in a two-up sprint between Pogačar and Mas, there was only going to be one result. A second consecutive win for Pogačar in Lombardy, a third monument win in the space of 18 months. He's now won as many monuments as Van der Poel and Van Aert combined, and with the impending retirement of the likes of Gilbert and Valverde, he will start 2023 as the active pro with the most monument wins. And he's only just turned 24. But he didn't win the Tour de France this year. So, was 2023 a disappointment for Pogačar? I don't think so. Yes, he would have been disappointed to not win the Tour, but he won his first race on the 23rd of February and his last on the 8th of October. In between, he won on the gravel roads of Strade Bianche, was arguably the strongest rider on the cobbles of Flanders, and was competitive at almost every race that he started. But what I've enjoyed most about his season is the way that he's attacked every single race. He clearly just enjoys bike racing, and although it would likely be beneficial for him to place more emphasis on peaking for the Tour de France next year, I for one hopes that he continues exactly the way that he has been. Back to the racing in Lombardy, and we have to say a fair play and congratulations to Enric Mas. He'd had a season to forget up until the end of July, having crashed or cracked at almost every race up to that point. But since then, he's completely turned it around. Second at La Vuelta, a win at the Giro dell'Emilia, and now his first podium placing at a monument. He'll now go into the off-season content and be motivated for even more success next year. And who foresaw Mikel Landa finishing third in that race? I certainly didn't, but then that's peak Landismo, isn't it? Predict his performances at your peril. For Spain, it was a fantastic race with Rodriguez 5th and Valverde 6th. They had 4 riders in the top 6 on the day. Italy failed to get anyone inside the top 10, and I wondered if that had ever happened before. But the answer is yes, and only 3 years ago in 2019. Moving on now to the Tour de Romandie, where Ashleigh Moolman-Pasio took her first ever World Tour win. That came on stage 2, which finished atop a 17-kilometre climb to Tyon 2000. Now, everybody was waiting for Annemiek van Vleuten to make her trademark attack there, but while she accelerated, she was not able to drop everybody. Moolman-Pasio waited and waited and waited, and then put an attack in herself, distancing the world champion. And by the time she reached the finish line, the gap was 26 seconds. And it was quite hard to believe that it was her first World Tour win. But as she herself said in her post-race interview, it does underline her decision not to retire at the end of the season is the correct one.
I mean, it's a great way to finish the season. I was going to retire, actually. At the beginning of the year, I announced my retirement, but I already decided in May to continue. And so this is really good confirmation that my decision was the correct decision. Because, you know, to finish on a high like this, to have such a great victory yesterday on a mountaintop finish, it gives me a lot of confidence in the off-season to work really hard and to have an even better year next year.
Ashleigh will be back racing next year for AG Insurance. Third on that Queen stage was Elisa Longo Borghini, and what a year she's had. 6 wins in total, including the cobblestones of Paris-Roubaix, the Women's Tour, which came through bonus seconds that she won in the sprint on the final stage, and now third overall in a stage race that was decided on a 17-kilometre mountain. Chapeau to you. Stage 1 of the race was won by Movistar's Arlena Sierra in a reduced bunch sprint. One of my favourite riders, always love seeing her winning, as does Annemiek van Vleuten, her teammate. I loved this reaction from her after the finish line. The final stage, which ended in a slightly bigger bunch sprint, was won by Marta Lack of Ceratizit WNT Pro Cycling. That was also her first World Tour win, and from what I've read, she's not yet secured a team for next year. Somebody give that woman a contract. So at the end of Romandie, this is how the World Tour standings looked. Annemiek van Vleuten winning it for a third time in her career, with Demi Vollering in second and Lorena Wiebes completing a Dutch 1-2-3 in third. Speaking of Wiebes, she racked up her 23rd win of the season at Banche on Tuesday. 23 wins from just 50 days of racing. That is absolutely bonkers. She received a fantastic lead out on the uphill finish from her teammate Pfeiffer Georgi, and once she kicked to the line, it was the same story as it's been all year. There was a cracking ride that day from Annina Attasalo of Uno X as well. She came third at the age of just 19. Watch out for her next season. In the men's, the main attractions were Remco Evenepoel, who was riding his first race as world champion, and Philippe Gilbert, who was riding his final race in Belgium. Evenepoel animated the race in the mid-section of it, but ultimately came to the line with Ilio Kaiser, his teammate who's also hanging up his wheels at the end of this year. Christophe Laporte continued his excellent season there. The Frenchman attacked with just over 10 k's to go, taking Rasmus Tiller with him, but the Norwegian was no match for Laporte in the tough rise to the line. Gilbert would end up finishing in 6th. Right then, let's now talk about Philippe Pogana. On Saturday evening, he took on the world hour record. For years, we've been saying that if he attempted it, he'd knock it out of the park, and Saturday was his moment of truth. The man he had to beat was also the man who was the brains behind his attempt. Dan Bigham set the benchmark just under 2 months ago on the same Swiss velodrome in Grenchen with a distance of 55.548 kilometres. An incredible feat for a person who would admit himself that he's not the most physiologically gifted rider out there. Ganna, whilst far more powerful, is a much bigger unit, and so some were questioning whether he'd beat that distance by much or even at all. And those questions certainly hadn't been answered in the first 10 minutes of the attempt, where Ganna fell behind Bigham by 3 seconds at a point. But then, with his warm-up complete, he accelerated, and it was quite phenomenal to watch. This graph from Dr. Xavier Disley shows just how measured and controlled Ganna's effort was, with his fastest lap coming around 45 minutes into that effort, 15.1 seconds, which is an average speed for that lap of 58.99 kilometres per hour. 58.99 kilometres per hour. That's just short of 37 miles per hour. Next time you're descending, when you get to that speed, imagine riding it on a flat velodrome. Now, he did fade just slightly from there to the end of the hour, but once the gun went off at the end of 60 minutes, he'd ridden a whopping 56.792 kilometres, adding over 1.2 kilometres to Bigham's record, and eclipsing Chris Bourman's 99.6 record, which he set in the now banned Superman position. Well, Ganna is the new Superman. Not only did he not collapse off his bike after the effort, his hair was barely out of place when he took off his helmet. The question now is, who can better that mark? Nobody, except Ganna himself, is my answer to that question. The combination of his power, his track experience, his equipment, and the expertise in the backroom staff is something I don't think anybody else is going to be able to compete with in a very, very long time. I hope I'm wrong, but that is my educated guess. I mean, to put his rider into some sort of context, he was averaging a time of 4 minutes 13.6 seconds per 4 kilometres, a time that would have been an individual pursuit world record until 1996 with the use of the Superman position. Yes, I know that that's from a standing start, but still, that is crazy fast. Let me know in the comment section below who you think might be able to beat Ganna's distance. Right, just before I wrap up the rest of the racing from last week, I'll let you know what we've got coming for you on GCN Plus this week. And as much as I promised that the road season is winding down, we've got an 8-day stage race starting tomorrow. It's the Tour de Langkawi, which is back after a one-year absence, and it's got one of the best lineups of teams that I can remember it having in a very long time. Cofidis, Lotto Soudal, UAE, EF, Movistar and Alpecin-Deceuninck are amongst the squads competing. 4 of those are probably only going because they thought the relegation battle might not yet be decided. But nevertheless, it should still give us some very decent racing over there, and there are no territory restrictions on that particular race. We've also got 2 other road races this week, both in Italy. On Wednesday is the Giro del Veneto, and on Sunday is the final road race of the European season, the Veneto Classic. Both races are available worldwide, and we should have some big name riders finishing their seasons there. It's not just about the road this week though. We've also got the UCI Track World Championship starting on Wednesday and continuing through to Sunday. Those will be available to watch if you're in Europe, excluding Denmark, Norway, Sweden and Italy. And the same territory restrictions apply to round 2 of the UCI Cyclocross World Cup, which this Sunday is in Fayetteville. Many of you will remember that that's where Marianne Vos and Tom Pidcock were crowned world champions back in January. Beyond the live and on-demand racing, we've got yet another documentary out tomorrow. Cillian Kelly will be a familiar name to many of you. He's our resident stats geek, but rather than just talking about cycling, this year he's been actually doing some. His aim? To complete L'Étape du Tour, with almost 5,000 metres of climbing and 165 kilometres through the French Alps. Here's a quick glimpse of that film. It's a serious challenge even for professional cyclists. But Cillian isn't a pro. In fact, he's barely an amateur.
Good start.
So I can't even swallow.
To the wrong cleats. This is superb, come on.
Over the next 5 months, Cillian will fit intense training.
I often think while I'm out on the bike, why am I doing this?
Around his equally intense family and work life.
Oh, there he is.
With advice and encouragement from experts along the way.
The problem, Cillian, for you is there's a lot of unknowns here.
Can a regular, unfit cycling geek go from 0 to hero?
It's a brand new bike! I'm going to have to call the lads and say, I can't do this. I'll never get to the top.
I watched that documentary in full just a couple of days ago and it's absolutely fantastic. I thoroughly recommend that you watch it when it comes out on GCN Plus tomorrow. On Wednesday on GCN Plus, it's the final World of Cycling of the 2022 season and it's the big awards show. Don't forget to cast your votes on the GCN app if you haven't done so already, and tune in on Wednesday evening to see who's won what there. Right then, the UCI Gravel Worlds, possibly the most controversial race in the history of cycling, if social media is anything to go by. The UCI are ruining gravel, this isn't a proper gravel course, etc, etc. If you watch the races at the weekend, I'd love to know your thoughts on the event, especially if you're a die-hard gravel fan, or contrary to that, it was the first time you'd ever watched a gravel race. I personally thought it was a decent watch. I think some of the production could have been improved so we get more of an idea as to exactly what's going on in the races, but I think there's a lot of potential there, and that the road pros competing there will only help to grow the sport's audience. On Saturday, we had a group of 5 riders clear of the rest. Chiara Tiocchi of Italy attacked with around 60 kilometres remaining, taking Sina Fry of Switzerland, Jade Trefeson of Germany, Lauren Stevens of the USA and Pauline Ferrand-Prevot of France with her. Stevens later succumbed to cramp, with Ferrand-Prevot pressing on at the front. In the end, only Fry was able to stick to her wheel, but she was unable to get the better of her in the sprint to the line. For Ferrand-Prevot, that marked her 4th World Championship title in the space of just 2 months. Short track mountain bike, cross-country mountain bike, marathon mountain bike, and now the gravel world. Absolutely incredible. And I hope she goes back to cyclocross this winter to try and take a 5th, because you'd imagine she'd have a pretty good chance. In the men's, the winning move went a whopping 150 kilometres from the finish. Gianni Vermeersch of Belgium and Daniel Oss of Italy slipped off the front, and with their teammates dissuading would-be attackers behind them, they built up a lead of close to 6 minutes. And that is a big advantage to two solid World Tour riders, and it proved insurmountable to those behind. In the closing stages, Vermeersch went full gas on a single-track section, distancing Oss and sailing away to take the world title. Oss held on for the silver medal, whilst Van der Poel was the best of the rest, out-sprinting Van Avermaet for the bronze medal on the day. And that was, rather surprisingly, the best result for Van Avermaet in a UCI World Championship race. Right, a quick shout out now to Eurosport and GCN Plus commentator Elenia Lazzaro, who finished third in her age category race on Saturday. Felicitazioni. Paris Tours now, and it was back-to-back wins at that race for Arnaud Démare, but under very different circumstances. Last year it was from a small group. This year, despite all the gravel sectors, a group of over 40 riders contested the win. Ed Turns took second place on the day and Sam Bennett third. Démare, though, finished this season with 11 one-day races, winning 2 of them and finishing second in 6 of them. He's pretty consistent, isn't he? To wrap up the other road races of last week, Jasper Philipsen took his 9th and Alpecin de Koenig's 30th win of the year at Paris-Bourges on Thursday, outsprinting Démare and Coquard. At Grand Piemonte also on Thursday, it looks like it was going to be a fight amongst the big-name sprinters. However, a few teams had other ideas. Bahrain victorious were particularly aggressive on the only major climb in the second half of the race, the Superga, and a group of around 40 riders forced themselves clear of the likes of Cavendish and Coy. And despite the best efforts of Jumbo-Visma and Ineos, the sprinters group never came back. In the small group sprint, it was Ivan Garcia Cortina who proved quickest, beating Matej Mohoric to the line. I've got to say, Movistar have had an absolutely brilliant end to this season. Cyclocross now, and it was the first round of the UCI World Cup yesterday in Waterloo in the USA. 5 Dutch riders were locked together for the majority of the women's race, and it was one of the best final laps of a race that I've seen in a very long time. European champion Lucinda Brandt forced the pace, but while she succeeded in dropping Betzemer and Wurst, she couldn't shake off Van Empel or Alvarado. Van Empel and Brandt traded blows throughout that final lap, with both wanting to take control at the front of the race. But in the end, it was the youngster who proved strongest, leaving Brandt shaking her head behind her. Alvarado took second place, her best performance in quite some time at that level. In the men's, there wasn't too much suspense, I've got to say. Eli Iserbyt took off at warp speed on lap 1 and had already opened a gap on the rest by the end of that first lap. Laurens Sweeck looked briefly as though he might be able to close the gap, but when Iserbyt lit the afterburners again, he was never able to get on terms. First World Cup, first win for Iserbyt, with Sweeck holding on for second and Lars van der Haar preventing an all-Belgian podium by finishing third. In other news, Magnus Bagstedt, who many of you will be familiar with for many different reasons, winning Paris-Roubaix, commentary and father to 2 superstars, he's going to be the head sports director of Canyon SRAM next year. Having already done some races with that squad this year, they both saw it as a good fit, and I think we can all agree he'll be doing a great job there. Hopefully, he'll still find some time to do commentary around his other duties in 2023. One of the races he probably won't be able to commentate on, you'd imagine, is the Tour de France Femmes avec Zwift. It'll be the second edition of the race next year, and it looks as though the start is going to be in Clermont-Ferrand in the Massif Central, with rumours that it will culminate with a stage or 2 in the Pyrenees Mountains. Full details of the route will be announced on the 27th of October, along with the route for the men's race, which next year starts in the Basque Country. Sticking with women's racing, there will be a host of new rules applied from 2023. World Tour teams will now be allowed a maximum of 22 riders unless they have no neo-pros, in which case the maximum will be 20. There's also a new rule that allows squads to sign a replacement rider if one of their original roster goes on maternity leave. A more general rule to all UCI registered teams is that they are now allowed to change their kit design up to 3 times per year. Until now, it's only been 1 change allowed per season. Hopefully, this will allow for some very cool designs, although I have to say, it could be a commentator's nightmare. In more unsavoury news, 7 Portuguese riders were handed suspensions over doping offences last week. All of those riders are a part of the W52 FC Porto team, which had its UCI licence taken away in the summer. The longest suspension, of 4 years, was handed to João Rodrigues, who won the Vuelta ao Algarve last year ahead of Ethan Hayter. He was found to have abnormalities in his blood passport, as well as be in possession of a banned method, details of which were not in the UCI statement. Right, I'll finish this week's racing news show with a few riders who've now ridden their final professional race. The biggest names, as mentioned before, are Alejandro Valverde, Vincenzo Nibali and Philippe Gilbert. The Spaniard, now 42 years of age, turned pro 21 years ago, winning over 130 races in that time. Nibali ends his career having won all 3 Grand Tours at least once, Il Lombardia twice and Milano-San Remo amongst 52 career victories. In an era when it became the norm to be sort of calculating and specialising Grand Tours at the expense of one-day races, Nibali, I've got to say, was a breath of fresh air. And I think we'll all remember him for his incredible descending, which put as many riders in trouble as his climbing did. Rumours are circulating, though, that next year he will join the staff of Doug Ryder's new team. But whatever his future holds, we wish Vincenzo Nibali all the best and thank him for the entertainment over the last 16 years. Gilbert ended his career with 27th place at Paris Tours yesterday. None of us watching pro cycling in 2011 will ever forget the season he had back then. He took 18 wins, including a 10-day period in which he won Brabant's Appeal, Amstel, Flèche and Liège. 2 years after that, he became the world champion. Nicky Terpstra also called time on his career yesterday at Paris Tours, a rider who's won Paris-Roubaix and the Tour of Flanders in the past, but the last few years have been beset by injury and bad luck. Other riders hanging up their wheels are Alex Dowsett, double Giro d'Italia stage winner and former hour record holder, who rode his last race at the Sparkers and Münsterland Giro last week. Dowsett's one of the only professional athletes in the world who competed with haemophilia, and during his time as a pro he raised an awful lot of money for the Little Bleeders charity, which I'm sure he'll continue to do in retirement. Sebastian Langeveld, Dimitri Klaes, Tanel Kanga are also retiring, as is Mikel Niev, who had the worst possible end to his career, crashing out of Il Lombardia, and that one looked particularly nasty, so get well soon, Mikel. And finally, Kevin Van Melsen rode his final professional race at Banches-sur-Mer-Banches last Tuesday, having spent his entire 14-year career with the same team, Intermarché Wanty-Gobert. Congratulations to all of you and all the best for whatever comes next. That's all for this week. I'll be back again next Monday. Bye for now.